The sun had just begun its climb, casting long shadows over the winding trail. The crisp air carried the scent of pine and earth as we gathered our gear at the trailhead. This trip had been planned for months, and I had been looking forward to it, a chance to reconnect with Lily and escape the grind of daily life. The group, about 8 of us, buzzed with energy as we checked maps and adjusted packs. Lily stood a few feet away, her blonde hair catching the light as she laughed at something Josh said. Josh wasn't part of our usual crowd. We'd met him at the ranger station earlier that morning. He was tall, with an easy smile and a way of drawing people in. I'd noticed Lily glancing at him more than once during introductions, but I brushed it off. She was friendly with everyone. It was part of what I loved about her. As we set off, the trail stretched out before us, a narrow path weaving through dense woods. I stayed close to Lily, trying to engage her in conversation, but her responses were clipped, her attention drifting to Josh, who had taken up the lead. He turned to help her over a fallen log, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment too long. It was subtle, probably something no one else would notice, but it planted a seed of unease. The hours passed, and the trail grew steeper. Conversations ebbed and flowed around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lily, usually so attentive, seemed distant. When we paused for a break, I watched her laugh at one of Josh's stories, her hand brushing his arm. The way she leaned in, the sparkle in her eyes. It wasn't how she looked at me anymore. I decided not to dwell on it. This was supposed to be a relaxing trip, and I wasn't about to let my imagination ruin it. Still, I found myself watching her more closely. Her smile seemed brighter when Josh was around, and when I tried to joke with her, she barely responded. My gut told me there was more to it than harmless friendliness, but I wasn't ready to believe it. As the sun began its slow descent, we reached a clearing and decided to set up camp for the night. Tents were pitched, and the smell of campfire smoke filled the air. I tried to shake the tension building in my chest, but it only grew stronger as I noticed Lily choosing to sit across from me at dinner, her spot conveniently close to Josh. After the meal, the group dispersed to prepare for the night. Lily avoided my gaze, muttering something about checking her pack. She disappeared into the shadows near the tents, and I was left staring into the fire, wondering when we had started to drift so far apart. For the first time, the trip I'd been so excited for began to feel like a mistake. I resolved to push the thoughts aside, but deep down, I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't ignore. That night, as the fire burned low and the group's laughter faded into the dark, I lay awake in our tent, staring at the nylon ceiling. The faint murmur of voices outside reached my ears, Lily's voice, unmistakable, and the low rumble of Josh's in response. My heart tightened. For the first time, I wondered if I should have trusted my instinct sooner. Morning broke with a golden glow filtering through the dense canopy above. The air was brisk, filled with the scent of dew-soaked leaves and the distant chirping of birds. The group buzzed with energy as they prepared for another day of hiking. Lily, as usual, seemed engrossed in her own world, chatting animatedly with Josh while the rest of us packed up. I watched them from a distance, my stomach knotting with unease. The way her face lit up when she spoke to him was a stark contrast to the distant, almost indifferent way she had been treating me. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, rolling up our tent, stuffing it into its bag, but my mind kept drifting back to the night before, to the voices I had heard outside our tent. The trail that day was steeper, winding higher into the mountains. It was meant to be the most challenging stretch of the trip, but even with the incline, Lily seemed more energized than I had seen her in months. Every so often, I caught her looking back at Josh, their shared smiles quick but unmistakable. Around midday, we reached a scenic overlook with a view of the valley below. The group took the opportunity to rest and snap pictures. I stood apart, leaning against a tree and watching Lily from a distance. She sat on a rock next to Josh, her body angled toward him, her laughter carrying on the breeze. It wasn't just friendly banter anymore. There was an intimacy to it, a kind of shared understanding that made my skin crawl. As we began packing up to leave, I noticed Josh passing something to Lily, a folded piece of paper. She glanced at it briefly before slipping it into her pocket. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Whatever was going on, I needed to be smart about it. Confronting her here, in front of everyone, wouldn't get me anywhere. The tension carried into the evening as we made camp again, this time in a wooded clearing near a shallow stream. The group gathered around the fire, swapping stories and jokes. I forced myself to participate, even as I noticed Lily and Josh stealing glances at each other across the flickering flames. Later, after most of the group had retired to their tents, I stayed by the fire, pretending to stoke the embers while keeping an ear out. Sure enough, I heard it. Lily's laughter, soft and conspiratorial, followed by Josh's low chuckle. They were just out of sight, their voices muffled but clear enough for me to catch snippets of their conversation. "Do you think he suspects anything?" Josh asked, his tone playful. "Not a clue," Lily replied, her voice tinged with amusement. "He's too trusting." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands tightened around the fire poker, the metal biting into my palm. Every instinct screamed at me to confront them, to march over and demand answers, but I held back. Whatever was happening, I needed to know the full extent of it before I made my move. When Lily finally returned to our tent, she acted as though nothing had happened. "Long day, huh?" she said, crawling into her sleeping bag without looking at me. "Yeah," I muttered, watching her settle in. The urge to confront her was almost overwhelming, but I bit it back. For now, I would play along, but I wouldn't stay silent for long. The night air was cool, carrying the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. The fire had long since burned down to embers, and the camp was silent. I lay in the tent, staring into the darkness, my mind replaying the whispered exchange I had overheard earlier. Lily's words, her tone, it all echoed in my head, twisting the knife deeper with every passing second. Sleep was impossible. I turned over, reaching out instinctively, but Lily wasn't there. My hand met the empty fabric of her sleeping bag. My chest tightened as I sat up, scanning the dim interior of the tent. Her shoes were gone. Heart pounding, I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped out into the cool night. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. I glanced around, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Most of the other tents were zipped up, their inhabitants fast asleep. I moved carefully, the soft crunch of dirt beneath my boots the only sound. Near the edge of the camp, I noticed a faint glow, light spilling from a tent. It was Josh's tent. I paused, my stomach twisting into knots as I approached. Voices carried softly from inside, muffled but unmistakable. One of them was Lily's. I crouched low, careful not to disturb the tent's shadowy perimeter, and strained to listen. "Can't keep sneaking around like this," she was saying, her voice low but tinged with laughter. "He'll figure it out eventually." Josh chuckled. "By the time he does, we'll be long gone." My fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Instead, I peered through the tiny gap where the zipper wasn't fully closed. Inside, I saw them sitting close, their heads nearly touching. Lily's hand rested lightly on Josh's arm, her fingers tracing patterns across his skin. The intimacy between them was undeniable. They weren't doing anything overtly incriminating, but it didn't matter. I knew what I was seeing, what it meant. "Let's not ruin the trip," Josh murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We have time." Lily smiled, leaning in as if to kiss him, but stopped short. "We should head back before anyone notices," she said softly. I backed away, moving quickly and silently through the shadows until I reached my tent. My chest heaved with quiet fury as I crawled inside and zipped it up behind me. A minute later, the faint sound of footsteps approached. Lily slipped back in, her movements deliberate but casual. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Toilet," she replied, not even hesitating. She stretched out in her sleeping bag as if nothing had happened. I stared at her, my jaw tight, but I didn't press. Not yet. Her lies were becoming second nature, and I wasn't about to let her think she could keep fooling me. If this was the game she wanted to play, then I'd make sure she lost. I turned onto my side, facing away from her, my mind already working out the next step. I would need proof, something undeniable that she couldn't talk her way out of. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the thin fabric of the tent, cutting through the haze of my restless thoughts. Lily was already up, her absence another reminder of how far apart we had drifted. Outside, the group was stirring. Some were stretching, others tending to the fire for breakfast. I stepped out into the crisp air, scanning the camp until I spotted her by the stream with Josh, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Storming over there wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I decided it was time to dig deeper. If I couldn't catch her red-handed, I'd find something she couldn't deny. After breakfast, while everyone was packing up for the day's hike, I made my move. Lily had left her pack near our tent, unattended. I crouched down, pretending to adjust my boots, and unzipped the side pocket. My hands trembled slightly as I rifled through her belongings, just enough to make it look undisturbed. That's when I found it. A folded piece of paper, tucked neatly between her travel journal and a packet of snacks. My stomach churned as I unfolded it, the words scrawled in her familiar handwriting jumping off the page. Josh, I can't keep pretending anymore. I want us to be together, away from all of this. Once the trip is over, we'll talk about how to move forward. Ethan won't suspect a thing if we play it right. Let's keep fooling him for now. It's safer this way. Yours, Lily. The words blurred as my pulse thundered in my ears. My hand tightened around the paper, crumpling it slightly before I forced myself to smooth it out. I quickly pulled out my phone, snapping a picture of the note. Evidence. I would need it later. The rest of the day passed in a surreal blur. Every glance, every laugh between Lily and Josh felt sharper, more pointed. I replayed the words of the note over and over in my mind, each one driving the knife deeper. She wasn't just cheating. She was plotting, manipulating me, turning me into a fool in front of everyone. By the time we reached the next campsite, my resolve had hardened. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, but I also wasn't going to act rashly. I needed more. Evidence that would make her lies crumble under their own weight. Lily was too busy chatting with Josh to notice me watching her from across the fire that night. I stayed silent, my face a mask of indifference, but inside, I was seething. Every word she spoke, every movement she made, felt calculated. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. As the fire burned low and people started retreating to their tents, I made eye contact with Olivia across the flames. She raised an eyebrow, her expression questioning. I gave her a small nod, silently resolving to bring her into this. I needed someone on my side, someone I could trust. Later, as Lily slipped into the tent beside me, her back turned like I didn't exist, I stared into the darkness. The note sat heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of the betrayal unfolding around me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning came with a cold, misty drizzle that clung to everything. The group moved slower than usual, some grumbling about wet gear and others trying to motivate themselves for another day of hiking. I barely noticed. My focus was on finding a moment to talk to Olivia without raising suspicion. She was by the fire, tying her boots, when I approached. Olivia had always been straightforward, with a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. We'd been friends since we were kids, and if there was anyone I could trust, it was her. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. "Can I talk to you? Alone." She glanced up, her hazel eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "Sure. Let me grab my pack." We walked a little ways from the camp, the mist muffling the sounds of the others. Olivia slung her pack over one shoulder and looked at me expectantly. "What's going on, Ethan?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin. Then I pulled the note from my pocket and handed it to her. "This," I said simply. She unfolded the paper and read it, her expression hardening with each word. When she finished, she looked up, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "Lily wrote this?" I nodded. "I found it in her bag yesterday. And it's not just the note. She's been sneaking off with Josh, laughing behind my back, acting like I'm invisible. I don't know how long this has been going on, but it's not just an affair. She's planning something bigger." Olivia folded the note carefully and handed it back. "This is awful. Ethan. I'm so sorry. She paused, then added, What are you going to do? I'm going to confront her, but not yet. I need more evidence. Something that makes it impossible for her to twist the truth. I clenched the note in my hand, my knuckles white. I'm not letting her walk away from this without consequences. Olivia nodded, her jaw set. You're right. If she's willing to lie and manipulate you like this, you can't give her any room to spin the story. What do you need from me? Her words were a relief, a lifeline in the chaos. Just keep an eye on her. And Josh, if you see anything, hear anything, let me know. I don't want to tip my hand too early. You've got it, Olivia said, her tone firm. She placed a hand on my shoulder. We'll get through this, Ethan. And when you're ready to confront her, you won't be alone. We returned to camp just as the group was packing up to leave. I caught Lily watching us from across the clearing, her expression unreadable. I forced myself to smile and act normal, but inside, I was seething. As the day wore on, I noticed Olivia keeping her word. She stuck closer to Lily and Josh, pretending to be part of their conversations but subtly watching them. More than once, she glanced back at me, her expression telling me she'd seen enough to share later. That night, as we set up camp again, I felt a small sense of relief. I wasn't in this alone anymore. With Olivia's help, I knew I could outmaneuver Lily and Josh. They thought they were clever, but they hadn't accounted for me, or the people willing to stand by my side. For now, I'd play my part. But the time for confrontation was coming, and I intended to make it one they'd never forget. The camp had settled into a quiet hum of activity by the time I put my plan into motion. The group was scattered, some gathering firewood, others chatting idly near the tents. Lily and Josh were off by the edge of the clearing, laughing about something only they found funny. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay composed. The confrontation would come, but not yet. I pulled Olivia aside as the group began to spread out for the afternoon. Her presence was a steadying force, and I needed her insight. Anything new? I asked, keeping my voice low. She glanced toward Lily and Josh, her expression grim. They've been a little too cozy all day, whispering, sneaking looks at each other. It's obvious to anyone paying attention. She hesitated before adding, they were talking about splitting off from the group tomorrow to explore on their own. I gritted my teeth. Not happening. If they want to play games, I'll make sure they lose. Olivia nodded. What's the plan? Evidence, I said. I want everything. Pictures, recordings, anything that makes it impossible for her to deny what's going on. Can you keep them distracted while I set up some cameras near their tent? I'll handle it, Olivia said without hesitation. You focus on getting what you need. With her keeping them occupied, I retrieved the small camera I'd tucked into my pack. It was discreet, perfect for capturing moments without drawing attention. I found a spot near Josh's tent, just out of sight, but with a clear view of the entrance. If they tried anything tonight, I'd have proof. The day dragged on, tension building with every passing hour. Lily barely spoke to me, her attention focused entirely on Josh. Her laughter grated on my nerves, a constant reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. When night fell, the group gathered around the fire as usual. I stayed quiet, watching and waiting. Olivia, true to her word, stayed close to Lily and Josh, asking questions and steering their conversations. They didn't seem to notice her subtle probing, too wrapped up in their private world. Later, when the camp began to wind down, I pretended to turn in early. I slipped into my tent, making enough noise to sell the act, then waited. The sounds of people settling for the night faded, replaced by the quiet rustling of the forest. I lay in the dark, every muscle tense, listening. It didn't take long. Soft footsteps passed by my tent, heading toward Josh's. I waited until the zipper on his tent slid open and closed before moving. Quietly, I retrieved the camera and checked the feed. The small screen lit up, showing Lily and Josh inside his tent, sitting far too close for comfort. They were speaking in hushed tones, but their body language said it all. Lily leaned into him, her hand resting on his knee. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to focus. This wasn't the time for rage. This was about building a case she couldn't argue against. Satisfied, I placed the camera back in its spot and returned to my tent. The images were burned into my mind, but they served their purpose. When the time came, I'd have everything I needed. Before dawn, I met Olivia by the stream. I showed her the footage, watching her expression shift from anger to determination. "This is it," she said. "You've got her. Now it's just a matter of when you confront her." "Tomorrow," I said, "at the campfire, with everyone there. She won't have anywhere to hide." Olivia nodded, her jaw set. "I'll back you up. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." I thanked her, my resolve solidifying. Lily and Josh thought they had the upper hand, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The sun dipped low, casting an orange glow over the campsite as the group gathered around the fire for dinner. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and cooked food, but my appetite had vanished. Tonight was the night, and every nerve in my body was on edge. I had spent the day rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to deliver the truth in a way that left no room for Lily or Josh to wriggle out of it. Olivia sat beside me, her calm presence a source of strength. She gave me a subtle nod, signaling her readiness. Across the fire, Lily was laughing with Josh, oblivious to the storm about to break. As the conversation died down and the group began relaxing into the quiet comfort of the evening, I cleared my throat. The sound cut through the murmurs, drawing all eyes to me. I stood, my hands steady despite the fire raging inside me. "I need to say something," I began, my voice firm, "and I need everyone to hear it." The group exchanged puzzled looks, the kind of uncertainty that precedes a revelation no one is prepared for. Lily stiffened, her smile faltering as her eyes met mine. "For the past few days, I've noticed things," I continued, my gaze fixed on Lily. "Things that didn't sit right. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I started paying closer attention." Lily shifted uncomfortably, her hand tightening around her mug. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "You'll see," I said sharply, "because I brought proof." I reached into my pack and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos of the note and the video footage. I turned the screen toward the group, the images and videos stark under the flickering firelight. Gasps rippled through the circle as everyone processed what they were seeing. Lily and Josh, the intimacy between them, the damning evidence of their betrayal. Lily's face went pale. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like." "Save it," I snapped, my voice rising. "I've heard enough lies. You wrote that note, Lily. You said you wanted to start a new life with him. You've been sneaking off with him every chance you get. And Josh," I turned to him, my anger burning hot. "You've been playing along, thinking I wouldn't notice. Well, guess what? I noticed." Josh opened his mouth to speak, but Olivia cut him off. "Don't even try," she said, her voice like steel. "We've all seen the evidence. You can't talk your way out of this." The group erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as the betrayal sunk in. Lily stood, her face twisted with anger and desperation. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Ethan. You've always been paranoid." I laughed bitterly. "Paranoid? You've been plotting behind my back, lying to me, humiliating me in front of our friends. And now you want to blame me?" Josh, who had been silent until now, stood as well, his expression shifting from shock to defiance. "Look, man, this isn't how I wanted you to find out. But maybe if you treated her better." I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw before he could say another word, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The group gasped, but no one moved to help him. He scrambled to his feet, holding his jaw, his confidence shattered. "You're done," I said coldly, pointing at him. "Get out of my sight." Lily stepped toward me, her voice trembling. "Ethan, please. We can talk about this. Don't do this in front of everyone." I stepped back, my voice steady but firm. "You made your choices, Lily. And now, everyone knows who you really are." The group fell silent as Lily and Josh gathered their things, their humiliation palpable. No one spoke as they left the campsite, disappearing into the darkness. The fire crackled softly, its light casting long shadows across the group. Olivia broke the silence, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. I nodded, the weight of the confrontation lifting slightly. But there was still more to do, more to say. For now, though, I was content to let the silence speak for itself. The next morning, the campsite was heavy with an awkward silence. Without Lily and Josh's loud voices filling the air, the group seemed quieter, more subdued. It wasn't sympathy for them, far from it. The tension came from knowing the fallout had begun, and no one wanted to be the next person dragged into it. I packed my gear methodically, each item a reminder that I had done what needed to be done. Olivia approached me as I rolled up my sleeping bag, her expression firm but understanding. "Looks like they're gone for good," she said, glancing toward the empty spot where Lily and Josh had set up their tents. "No sign of them this morning." "Good," I replied, my voice cold. "They made their choice. Now they can deal with the consequences." Word traveled fast in our group. By the time we were ready to set out on the trail again, everyone knew exactly what had happened. There was no pity for Lily or Josh, only disgust. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the sheer audacity of their actions had left a bitter taste in everyone's mouths. Throughout the day, the group's mood lightened. People talked more freely, their conversations carrying a newfound sense of camaraderie. Lily and Josh's absence had lifted a weight none of us had fully realized we'd been carrying. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction knowing they were the ones left behind, isolated and unwelcome. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the image of Lily's face during the confrontation. Her desperation, her anger. It had been genuine, but not in the way she wanted me to believe. She hadn't been sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. That evening, as we set up camp again, I overheard snippets of conversation from the others. "Unbelievable, what they tried to pull," one of them said. "Ethan handled it better than I would have," another replied. "I would have lost it." I didn't respond. Their words were well-meaning, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know about the nights I'd spent lying awake, wondering where I'd gone wrong. They didn't know about the note, the laughter, the whispered plans to take everything I'd worked for. All they saw was the aftermath. Olivia sat down beside me as I stared into the fire. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said automatically. But then I paused, forcing myself to be honest. "I don't know. Part of me is glad they're gone, but another part of me keeps wondering why it had to come to this." Olivia nodded, her gaze steady. "Because some people don't know how to be honest, Ethan. They take what they can and don't think about the damage they leave behind. Lily and Josh? They're just getting what they deserve." Her words settled over me like a balm, soothing the raw edges of my anger. She was right. Lily's isolation wasn't my doing. It was the result of her own choices. As the night wore on, I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. The fire crackled softly, the stars twinkling overhead like silent witnesses to everything that had happened. For the first time, I felt a flicker of peace. Lily and Josh had underestimated me. They thought I would crumble, that I would let their betrayal go unchecked. But now they were the ones left to face the consequences, alone, isolated, and unwelcome. And I wasn't done yet. The morning came with a chill that seeped through my jacket as I packed my gear for the final time. The air was quiet, the group subdued as we prepared to break camp. The tension of the past few days had taken its toll on everyone, but for me, it was a different kind of weight. I was ready to leave. Not just the trip, but everything tied to Lily and Josh. Olivia stood beside me, watching as I cinched the straps on my pack. "You sure about this?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I've done what I needed to do here. Now it's time to move on." She gave me a small smile, her hand brushing my arm briefly. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan. Don't forget that." The rest of the group gathered near the trailhead, saying their goodbyes. It was understood that I wasn't continuing with them. They offered words of support, some awkward but sincere, others more pointed in their disdain for Lily and Josh. "Don't let this ruin the outdoors for you," one of the guys said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You handled it better than most would have." "Thanks," I replied, my tone flat. I appreciated their words, but I wasn't in the mood for camaraderie. My focus was on getting back home and starting the process of cutting Lily out of my life for good. As I walked away from the group, Olivia caught up to me. "Hey," she said, "if you need anything, Anything at all, you know where to find me." I looked at her, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Olivia, for everything." She nodded, her expression serious. "Just take care of yourself, okay? And don't let her or him get in your head again." I gave her a small smile and turned toward the trail that would take me back to the ranger station. The path was quiet, the only sounds the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The solitude was welcome, giving me time to think, to plan my next moves. By the time I reached the station, the weight in my chest had begun to lift. I called a cab to take me back to the city, the ride silent except for the hum of the engine. My thoughts were already ahead of me, on the divorce papers I would file, on the evidence I would use to protect myself from any lies Lily might try to spin. When I arrived home, the emptiness of the house hit me like a wave. Lily's things were everywhere, her shoes by the door, her favorite throw draped over the couch. For a moment, the memories threatened to overwhelm me. But then I remembered the note, the laughter, the look on her face when I exposed her in front of everyone. The pain hardened into resolve. I began packing her belongings into boxes, each item a step closer to reclaiming my space, my life. By the time I was done, the house felt lighter, cleaner. I left the boxes in the garage and sent her a simple text. "Your things are packed. Let me know when you'll pick them up." I didn't wait for a response. Instead, I poured myself a drink and sat on the back porch, staring out at the fading light. The hardest part was over, but the journey ahead would be long. Still, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. Lily and Josh were out of my life. Now, it was time to rebuild. The divorce papers were the first step. I filed them the following week, ensuring every piece of evidence I had gathered was documented and submitted. The note, the photos, the videos, it all painted a clear picture of Lily's betrayal. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Helen, assured me that Lily wouldn't have much ground to stand on when it came to dividing assets. "She won't walk away with what she's hoping for," Helen said, flipping through the evidence. "You've got this locked down." It was the reassurance I needed. For too long, I'd felt like a pawn in Lily's game, but now the tables had turned. Word of the confrontation on the hiking trip spread quickly among our mutual friends. It wasn't long before people started reaching out, some offering support, others expressing disbelief at Lily's actions. The social fallout hit her hard. Friends who had once admired her turned cold, and invitations to gatherings dried up. Josh didn't fare much better. Rumors of his role in the affair circulated, and the easy charm he had wielded so effectively became a liability. People saw him for what he was, a coward who had no loyalty or integrity. According to Olivia, who still had a few connections in their circles, he and Lily were barely speaking by the time the divorce papers were served. Good riddance. The house, once a reminder of everything I had lost, became a project. I sold it within a month, unwilling to live with the ghosts of our marriage lingering in every room. With the money, I found a new place on the outskirts of the city, a modest but comfortable home surrounded by trees. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what I needed. Olivia helped me settle in, her steady presence a constant reminder that not everyone in my life was a liar or a manipulator. She even brought over a bottle of wine one evening, insisting we toast to my fresh start. "To freedom," she said, raising her glass with a smirk. "To moving on," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. The weeks turned into months, and gradually, the pain of what had happened began to fade. I focused on myself for the first time in years, rediscovering old hobbies and exploring new interests. The gym became a sanctuary, a place to channel my frustration and rebuild the confidence Lily had tried to strip away. One day, as I was clearing out an old box of photographs, I came across a picture of Lily and me from happier times. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into the trash. She was a part of my past now, a lesson learned. I wouldn't let her define my future. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the trip, and with it came a sense of closure. Lily's attempts to manipulate the proceedings fell flat in the face of the evidence I had presented. In the end, she walked away with nothing more than her personal belongings. I heard through Olivia that she had moved in with her sister, trying to piece her life back together. As for Josh, He disappeared from our circles entirely. I didn't care where he went. They were both part of a chapter one had closed for good. On the one-year anniversary of the hiking trip, I stood on the porch of my new home, watching the sun set over the trees. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. It reminded me of the trail, of the firelight flickering in Lily's eyes as she lied to my face. But instead of anger, I felt something else, relief, gratitude, even. I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. The shadows of betrayal no longer haunted me. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.